thanks again, everyone, for joining. I'm Napala. I'm the co-founder of Habitual, and here to talk to you today about something I'm personally really passionate about and something that we talk about a lot at Habitual as well, which is changing treatment models from a reactive approach to something more proactive. So I'd like to start out by talking a bit about how we think about health at Habitual and how I personally see it. And it's a super simple concept. It's that health is a spectrum. So at any point in our lives, we as humans exist somewhere along the spectrum between healthy and unhealthy. And that's fine. The issue comes in when we realize that we don't treat disease as a spectrum. We treat disease as a yes or a no. So I'll use type 2 diabetes as an example throughout this chat, but this really applies to any disease. Type 2 is what we focus on at Habitual, so I know it a bit more closely. So we don't really think of disease as a spectrum, right? Somebody is existing along the spectrum, and at one point, which in the case of type 2 diabetes, it's a HbA1c reading, we say, okay, now you're diabetic. And the problem with this is that we don't start treating somebody until the point of diagnosis. So someone will have existed along the sort of orange portion of the spectrum for their whole lives, getting closer and closer and closer to being diagnosed without having sort of any proactive intervention. When they do get diagnosed, then reactive treatment starts. So for a type 2 diabetes patient, I'll walk you through a bit what the journey might look like. Early on, they might discover they have a relative with diabetes, which we know is a risk factor for the disease. They might gain some weight at some point. They might experience some early warning signs of type 2 diabetes like fatigue. They might gain some more weight. They might have more warning signs. But at no point as somebody goes through these kind of early warning signs is anybody intervening. So what will happen is that they'll receive some feedback from healthcare professionals, maybe friends and family. You know, maybe you should think about a diet. Maybe you should be careful because of your family history. What about exercise? But at no point is anybody really taking any action to help somebody to move themselves more towards the healthy side of this. Once they get diagnosed, however, treatment starts, right? So these reactive treatments are pills. There are more pills. There's complication management. Unfortunately, a lot of people with type 2 diabetes experience devastating complications, and those have to be secondarily managed. And in 50% of cases, people will actually be put onto insulin to manage their blood glucose. So throughout this time, here's what's going on internally. As somebody gets closer and closer to diabetes and then the disease progresses, you'll see increasing amounts of fat in the liver. That leads to increasing amounts of fat in the pancreas, which influences how our bodies are able to respond to and produce insulin. There's a lot of other stuff going on as well. Just one example is the microbiome and what's going on in there. As a result of this, you've got rising blood glucose and all these complications we know about type 2 diabetes. So to note here, all of these things are happening on both sides of diagnosis. So even when somebody is healthy and they haven't been diagnosed with the disease, there's all this stuff internally that's happening that's getting them closer and closer to unhealthy. And this model is really costly. So for type 2 diabetes, we spend more than, just saw a message come through. Okay, ignore that. We spend more than $1 trillion per year managing type 2 diabetes and its secondary outcomes. The disease takes one life every 7 seconds. So in the 15 minutes we have here, that's 128 lives. And of those 128 lives, 50% of those people are under the age of 60. So it's not just a disease that's influencing our old populations and having an impact on them. It's really across every socioeconomic demographic as well. The second I'll talk about is cancer. So we spent more than $1 trillion on cancer in 2010. So you can imagine how that's ballooned since. That causes about 10 million deaths per year. Cardiovascular disease is another one. So the US alone spends $200 billion per year, and cardiovascular disease accounts for 31% of all deaths worldwide. So it's a huge, huge problem. Costly both in terms of dollars and cents, but also lives and the impact on patients. So proactive medicine is all about moving somebody to the left on the spectrum, regardless of whether or not they've been diagnosed with a disease. It's about helping people with the knowledge and the tools that they need to become healthier and empowering both the patients and their physicians and other healthcare providers to get them closer to the left of the spectrum. So there are really three things we talk about, three pillars when we think about proactive medicine. And I'll walk you through each in turn. So the first is patient-led health. The second is continuous and integrated capture of health data. And the third is scaling interventions via technology. So I'll start with patient-led health. Patients really need two key things to be proactive about their health. The first is knowledge, and the second is the tools that they need once they understand what they need to do, right? So I'll talk about type 2 diabetes. Again, there are tons of examples out there. We as clinicians have the knowledge that weight, activity, smoking, alcohol, sleep, microbiome, and a whole other range of things have an impact on both the development of type 2 diabetes and then also disease progression once somebody is diagnosed. Now, the first hurdle to overcome is to help patients understand that all of these things have an impact on their development and disease progression. Once we overcome that hurdle, we need to have the tools in the hands of the patients, right? So these are just some examples of interventions that exist now. Sleepio is CBT for sleep. Quit Genius does really great things in quit smoking. They've just launched alcohol addiction as well. This is my one shameless plug for Habitual. We help people with type 2 diabetes reverse their disease. ClassPass, tons of other sort of exercise tech companies out there, sort of democratizing access to exercise. Zoe's doing really cool things in the microbiome. So there are lots of tools that consumers now have at their fingertips that previously they may have had to go see a sleep specialist or an addiction specialist. They can now bring these things into the comfort of their own home at a much lower cost. So the point here really is about shifting somebody to the left of the spectrum and using these tools as something to do that. So at any point, whether or not somebody's been diagnosed, they can say, gosh, I've gained some weight. I think I want to go on a weight loss program. Gosh, I'm not sleeping well. I think I might try and download this app and see if that can help me. And all of these things collectively move someone, again, towards the left of the spectrum. But as ever, there's work to be done. So the first thing I'll say is that we need to expand socioeconomic availability to these things. So in many cases, these are tools that are available as a direct-to-consumer offering, but many people just can't afford them. So we need to have the payers bought into to giving this to everybody who needs it. The second is really user-centric product design. So, you know, in order to change somebody's behavior and change their lifestyle habits, you really need to build a product that resonates with them and that they engage with on a daily basis. And you can't do that without the right product design. And the third is better use of data to understand what each person needs at each time, right? So you can't go to somebody and say, right, you need an app for sleep, an app for your microbiome, a blood test, all these things, because every patient is going to have a different need depending on where they're at in their life and where they're at on this health spectrum. So we need to use data to better understand what is the right intervention for these people. The second pillar I'll talk about is continuous and integrated capture of health data. So we as humans are generating health data kind of at every moment. We're sort of throwing health data out into the ether. So along the top here, again, these are diabetes related, but kind of applies to everything. Along the top, you'll see some sort of external markers of health data. So your weight, your sleep, your wound healing, your thirst, your hunger. And on the bottom half, you'll see things that are happening internally. So markers of health data. So what's happening in your microbiome, what's happening with your hormones, with your blood glucose. And the issue is that currently, all of this data is just kind of going out into the world. We're not capturing and we're not doing anything with it. And all of that data is incredibly valuable in thinking about how to make somebody healthier. So there's really two pieces of the data puzzle that we're missing. The first is capturing that data in the first place, and the second is sharing it and sharing it with the right people who can intervene at the right times. We are making progress. So these are just a couple of examples. There are tons of companies doing really interesting things in this space. So on the capture side, everything from blood tests and increasing access to blood tests to fitness trackers to kind of wearable glucose monitors. On the sharing side, we've got tons of things with sort of remote patient monitoring and helping physicians and other clinicians being more connected to their patients, both before they need it and after an intervention. The three areas for innovation we really see here are, on the first hand, software and devices for capturing data. So, if you even look at the early days of kind of a smartwatch, compared to kind of the really cool small patch you can put on your arm now, those devices will only get more and more streamlined and easy to use. The second is data analytics. I don't want to say AI because everybody says that that's going to fix everything, right? But data analytics to find the signal through the noise. So as soon as we start capturing the data, that's amazing, and that's a really kind of great step forward, but we need to make sure that we can surface the relevant data to somebody who needs to intervene, right? And the third is an actionable follow-up pathways. So I wear a fitness tracker, for example, that calculates a recovery score every day. And if I were to go to my GP and say, hey, my recovery scores are really off, can you help me? Can you figure out what I should be doing? They just, because there is no set follow-up pathway. So we need to know, once we're collecting this data, once we're surfacing relevant insights, what do we then do with the patients? And the third and last pillar I'll talk about is scaling these interventions via technology. So proactive medicine has the potential to be a really incredible thing, right? It means that we can help people avoid disease in the first place, and when they are diagnosed, potentially even reverse their disease. The issue with that is that it means there are that many more people to treat, right? So going back to this slide we talked about earlier with everybody on the left-hand side of the spectrum not being treated, if we're being proactive, it means that we actually have to think about all these people and think about how to keep them on the healthy side. So I'll give the example again of type 2 diabetes, but this really applies across every disease. So there just are not enough healthcare professionals for proactive medicine face-to-face to be effective. So in the UK, there are 4.7 million diabetics. There are 7,100 dietitians. So we know type 2 diabetes is a nutritional disease. In theory, everybody should be seeing a nutritionist, right? With the number of nutritionists in the UK, they're outnumbered about 600 to 1 with type 2 diabetics. So that means that if a dietitian were to see a patient once a month, they'd be seeing 22 patients per day, every single day, day in, day out. That's maybe feasible if they just sit and have kind of very quick 10, 15-minute consults all day long. But if we're really being proactive, we should be thinking about not just the people who've been diagnosed with diabetes, but also who are obese or overweight. That's 66% of the UK population. So the dietitians would be completely overwhelmed with patients if this really is the way that we're going to look at the world. So, technology as ever is really the answer to this. And this is another spectrum. Apologies, the last one I'll give you. But the interventions here really kind of lie somewhere between this augmented professional interaction and a human agnostic intervention. So on the left-hand side, these are the more sort of telemedicines, with a lot of them sort of layering technology on top to make the clinician interactions much more relevant. And the human agnostic side, things like Headspace, things like Daylight, that are kind of a self-serve technology product that users can take into their own hands and use at any time without needing a human on the other side of the phone. And again, the opportunities for innovation or kind of needs for change. The first is shifting the reimbursement model. So as we shift from rewarding clinicians for seeing as many patients as quickly as possible, we really need to make sure that they're incentivized to help people not only reverse disease, but also to avoid it in the first place. So we need to make sure that they're incentivized appropriately to do that. The second is replacement of patient-clinician interaction, but in an intelligent way when it makes sense. So there are certain interactions that can very much be replaced by technology, but others that can't. So we need to know which ones are the right ones to replace. And the third thing is better data analytics, again, to really surface when a human interaction is needed. So we don't want to say, right, technology can just do all this. Gosh, sorry, the lights have gone out. Let's just hand it all to technology and see what happens, right? We need to know when there's something critical that's happening, when we need a human to intervene. So just to quickly summarize, proactive medicine really has the potential to change how we think about both disease, but also health in general. And it's really about moving somebody to the left of the spectrum towards the healthier side. And that applies regardless of whether they have been diagnosed with the disease, or whether they're completely sort of healthy on the outside. It's always about trying to move them towards a healthier place, both internally and externally. So to sum up all those kind of pillars and thoughts, there are really three things that need to happen. The first is aligning economic incentives, both for patients, for providers, and for payers. The second is better data capture and analytics so that we know what's going on with somebody and that we can intervene when it's relevant. And the third is user-centric product design. So the only way that technology can make healthcare better is if it's something that people want to engage with it, and they do engage with. So that's a really important piece of it as well. So I will end on that note. Thank you guys all for listening. I think I have about 10 minutes for questions, so happy to take any you have. Let me stop sharing. I see we have another digital therapeutics person. Let's see if I can turn the lights back on. Any questions? Data privacy. Yeah, I mean, that's a huge thing. And I think increasingly so with all of the hacks we're seeing, even outside of health, privacy is an ongoing and huge concern. So I think in a lot of cases, there have been really great moves by governments and other regulators to make sure that we're doing as best as possible with data. And from my personal experience, it means that as a startup or as a technology company, there are often these kind of hurdles you have to overcome. But I think that really it needs to be a priority, right? Because that's a way to lose trust, immediately from sort of all your customers. So tons and tons of really kind of important concerns to take into account. And I think, health data is probably one of, if not the most sensitive piece of data that we can collect from people. You think about data hacks with, your email address or maybe your credit card number. But when you think about health data, it's really like the most personal thing. So it's incredibly important, I think. Have you seen anything compelling, innovative in the user design space? I'm not sure what you mean by user design space, Steve. Lots customized apps, for instance. I feel like I'm not going to answer your question correctly because I don't fully understand. I mean, so within healthcare, oh, sorry.
Hi.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, sorry, I had to try this.
No worries.
I've invested in a telehealth company from Finland, and then it's a cloud-based, like all the features, not only video calls, but secure chats. You can do proactive care, etc. And you can monitor people who are long-term ill. I don't know the terms. I'm an engineer, so I don't know all the health tech terms. But how long would you? How fast? Now everybody's doing remote care. Like when COVID came, it like just jump-started everything. Like and over the night, they've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
Over the night, change comes in a really fast pace. But what about proactive care? I mean, how fast do you really see people going into proactive care? Because people tend to be reactive, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing signs of it happening, and the healthcare systems and the people paying for these things are always going to be a bit behind where consumers are thinking. But you see early signs of this. So in the UK, for example, I can speak to diabetes. We've been treating the outcomes of diabetes for kind of years on end here. But because of new research that's showing that diabetes is reversible, the NHS is doing small pilots to actually help people reverse their disease. And the expectation is that once they prove that diabetes is reversible, that they will then expand it to kind of pre-diabetics and people who are sort of on the pathway there.
Yeah.
So I think it's happening, but it will take time because the real challenge, I think, is that you need to prove out the healthcare economics of it, right? And we know that these diseases are very costly, but it takes a long time to prove out that actually helping somebody prevent or reverse disease is much cheaper. So we need all of that research to happen before governments and other payers will say, right, now let's double down here. And at the same time, they need the interventions that they can trust to be able to deliver that.
Yeah. One question. Sorry, I jumped into your talk later. Are you actually creating a software, or are you you're working with how it digitizing the treatments, or like the methods? So what are you actually doing? What's your business?
Yeah, so we combine a nutritional product with digital therapeutics. So there's a lot of really great evidence for the nutritional product. It's a nutritionally complete meal replacement product for helping reverse diabetes, but our digital therapeutics platform is what helps people change their behaviors in the long term. So it's a combination of online and sort of offline.
Yeah. Would it be okay to connect on LinkedIn maybe for future, since I'm going to work with it?
Of course.
Cool, thanks.
I'm just looking at these other questions. Carl, so we do not. The way that we've designed our program is a pretty sort of holistic behavior change program that could, in theory, work for everyone. So if you look at the population who we're targeting first, which is type 2 diabetics, there may be people in there who like yoga, who like mindfulness, for example, and we do recommend kind of this wide spectrum of activities. But it's not for everybody. So the way that we approach behavior change and habit change is that we talk about 3 categories of habits. So that's nutritional habits, that's mental habits, and that's physical habits. So nutritional is a pretty obvious one. Mental habits, we talk a lot about mindfulness with relation to food for sure, but also, what in your past has influenced your mental relationship with food, how does stress impact your eating? So kind of all those topics. And then we talk about physical habits as well. So we don't say, you 100% need to do this running routine or this lifting routine, gym routine, etc. Likewise, we don't say, okay, do yoga now, because some people just won't do yoga. It's really about developing a sustainable exercise routine for them. So I hope that answers your question. Could your program be used as a plugin to other online resources? So we've thought about this actually a lot in terms of as we grow. We're quite early. We only started last September, actually, so it's been a year. But as we grow, we really see an opportunity to kind of build a marketplace of health products that we could sort of surface the most relevant ones to people. So on top of our program and all of our kind of owned assets, we could then say, right, you look like a person who would really enjoy yoga based on our analysis of your sort of interactions with the application. Here's an example of a yoga program that you could join into. I think that's what you were asking. Or maybe the other way around, I'm not sure. But yeah, I think there are tons of opportunities for anybody, really not necessarily just us, but for anybody who owns the sort of health space in the consumer's mind to be the trusted third party that can recommend these these many, many tools out there. And there are so many things these days. Both ways, yes. Cool, thanks, Carl. Any other questions? Steve, I realized I kind of got distracted and then didn't answer your question, but happy to have a chat separately after if you would be keen. Is our program being used by the NHS? No. So like I said, we just started a year ago. Okay, thanks, Steve. So interestingly, the NHS have just announced, I don't know if you're in the UK, Karen, you may have seen the announcement this week. I think it was in the BBC that the NHS is rolling out this sort of shakes and soups diet for type 2 diabetes. We are not part of that because they were commissioning for that right when we were starting up. We're launching actually direct to consumer in the next couple of weeks. And the idea for us is that we'll build out a really compelling consumer offering and then use that to then have conversations at a higher level with the NHS. My co-founder and I have experience with NHS commissioning in the past, and it's basically a way to die really quickly as a startup, sadly. So yeah, hope that answers. Any other questions? I'm happy to stick around if there are others, but I think otherwise we are sort of at our end of question bit. Any last thoughts? Lots of questions. Oh gosh, okay. I'm happy to connect, Carl, if you want to have a chat separately. Right. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks everybody for coming, and thank you for your questions. Again, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Napala, I think, so you can find me pretty easily. And yeah, hope everybody has a really lovely time for the rest of the day. I'm pitching at a couple of the early stage pitching competitions and things. So if you want to hear a bit more about Habitual, then you can come there. Right. Thanks, guys. Cheers.